All
Okay,
right,
let's rock and roll.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to get right into the conversation that you came on to hear, but just a little bit about Map Connected's upcoming events. Join us next week this time if you are interested in learning a little bit more about recall insurance. We are going to be talking about some recall data trends, risk and risk engineering management. That was a topic that had come out of the annual conference in October, and people wanted to hear more about that. We're also going to be doing an AI event back later on in June, which is, I guess, our third or fourth AI virtual event. This one is going to be really focused on field data and utilizing AI along with field data for preventative measures. And then just some new things that are going to be, we are adding on this year for the annual vehicle service and warranty lifecycle summit. We are adding some roundtables. There are going to be 3 roundtable discussions that are going to be meant as benchmarking round robins, small group interactivity for 2 to 3 hours, and based on the participants from the OEMs and component manufacturers, we will determine the topics that we will cover. We are also adding on a technical services and diagnostics and an electrical vehicle service and ops summit that will take place at the conference for anyone that wants to stay on for a day and a half on October 23rd and 24th this year. So I just want to introduce Nick Horan, who is the Director of Global Business from Tweddle Group. He is going to be leading the conversation for the next hour. The chat is open, so please, if you have some questions as we're going through the next hour, please enter them there, and we'll try to get to them before the end of the hour. We'll also be distributing the recording and some presentation slides following the event. But thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to Nick.
Awesome. Thanks, Pam. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on how to send your technical content anywhere while staying compliant with regulations. Most people don't really think about it because it's not at the forefront, but when it comes to things like operator and service information, it actually needs to comply with different homologation and market regulations depending on where you're sending your content. If not, you could be exposed to liability, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of those things. So in this webinar, we're going to discuss the ins and outs at a high level and provide the audience with a little bit of guidance on really how to stay out of trouble, make sure that you're compliant. So with that, we'll go into intros. Pam already kindly introduced me. I'm Nick with Tweddle. I've been in this industry for over 12 years. I started as a technical author along with Gary, actually. Gary actually trained me on a whole bunch of stuff back in the day. So I've been in the weeds on making sure that content is homologated for different material. With that, I'll hand it over to Tony for a quick intro.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, Tony Smith, Director of Service Engineering at Canoo. I was service employee number 1 at Canoo, and proud to say that I'm coming up on my 3-year anniversary at Canoo. A lot of exciting things going on here. Career automotive readiness guy. I've always been on the OE readiness side, more on the tier 1 piece of it, and actually started in the technical information business is where I started my my automotive career. So very familiar with Tweddle and what they do.
Thanks, Tony. Happy to have you, man. Gary, you want to give us a quick intro?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. My name is Gary Ragland. I've been with Tweddle Group for 16 years. And in that time, all my projects and teams have centered around content development in various forms: print, web, video, from the technical side to the creative side. But one common theme throughout all of those projects is the topic of this webinar, which is kind of making sure information stays relevant and compliant with all the various things that these different projects require. So I'm very interested and excited to talk about these topics with all of you today.
Cool. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, fellas. So as briefly mentioned, we're here to share our experience and provide some guidance on how to ensure your tech info doesn't get you in trouble. So you'll hear us talk about a few things. I'll throw a few acronyms out there real quick. So we're going to be talking about the impact of CARB, the California Air Resource Board, NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, FMVSS and CMVSS, so federal or Canadian motor vehicle safety standards. And we'll even get into some more international type things like EC regulations in Europe, which is the Economic Commission for Europe. So also different regulations in the ASEAN region. Pretty much anywhere you go, there are going to be homologation regulations that you're going to need to comply with in order for your content to be accepted.
That's right.
So with that, we can go ahead and get started with a few questions at the highest level. And I'm looking to hear from Tony first on this one, because we've got two different perspectives, right? We have the OEM side, where Tony's fully responsible for all after-sales activities at Canoo. And we've got Gary, who's on the supplier side, who's responsible for actually developing the content. So I think we're going to end up with some good conversation here. But for starters, Tony, why do you care about any of this?
Because orange isn't my color. I need to stay out of trouble. No, really, it matters because it affects the end user, right? If we don't have something that's correct, if they use the vehicle in an inappropriate way that you didn't plan for, it comes back on you, right? And the government, comes knocking on your door at that point. And that's when you get into recalls and republishing and all of those things that cost time and money. And it really can come back and bite you if you're not really careful about dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then Gary, from the flip side, being the person responsible for the content, why do you care about any of this stuff?
I mean, all those same things Tony mentioned obviously apply. And, when we're working with an OEM, it's a partnership. So what's good for the OEM is good for us and vice versa. So we obviously want to do a good job just because our name's on it. We want to make sure we're delivering a good service. We want to make sure the OEM does not have any issues with, like you said, reprints, recalls, and also just the ethical side of things. These are things that people are using out in the field, where it's a technician or an owner. And we obviously want them to be safe, just like everybody else does. There's a reason these regulations are in place. They can feel burdensome sometimes, certainly when we're developing content, but they do have a place, obviously, because that's why they were developed. And we want to make sure that we're, the last part in the chain to make sure that those regulations make their way out to the field.
And just practically speaking, Gary, just in case any of the audience members don't have a firm handle on some examples of what content homologation means. I think back to when I was an author, writing wheels and tires section, and I knew that certain content had to be at like 14-point font. Do you have a couple examples in your hip pocket that you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's a great example, because it's one that we both know, you and I, very well. So an example like that would be with tire warranties, or with tire pressure, the placard on the vehicle. Different states sometimes have different requirements. So in a publication that may go to various states, one example we're talking about, I recall New Jersey was a state that had a certain point size in the font that had to be
That's
there.
right.
That was different than the other 49 states. So
That's right.
It's kind of, managing that and making sure we're hitting every last little detail. And it seems like it's an easy thing. You just kind of just put a warning in, but it's obviously much more complicated than that. And that's probably the best example I can think of. We also had one publication where in a lemon law book, for the end consumer, that certain states required yellow background. Other ones required no background. So it's not just even the content you're writing, it's how it appears. It's the font, it's the size, it's the color, it's all of those things that you don't necessarily think of when you're just developing content. It's the form as well as what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I remember a lot of that. I remember you training me on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Seems like yesterday.
I know, right? Time flies, man. Time flies. So worst case scenario, worst case impact. NHTSA could come along or another governing body could come along and say, well, you need to recall everything you have in the field. Worst case, it's not digital content. Worst case, you have printed, say, owner's manuals out there in the field, and you've got to actually pull all of those manuals out. You have to locate each one of them, pull them back, get things reprinted, redelivered to customers. From a customer experience standpoint, Tony, I'm guessing that wouldn't bode very well.
That's not the customer experience you want to have. You know, that's not a good look anywhere. You know, so then, and then the other thing is, for the customers and from the government side, I mean, then now they've found one thing. What other nuggets may I find if I keep digging further, right? And you never want that, you know. So, if we can do it once, do it properly, and be done with it, you know, you want to make sure you do that.
So, great segue. So, what can you do to avoid it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's why you have partners, in my opinion, right? What I fear every day when we develop information is that, using a baseball term, but you know, that ground ball between the legs. You know, that simple thing that you overlooked and you can't believe it got by you, but now it's made it to your legal department, and you know, now it's an issue, right? So that's what I'm always guarding against. That's why I talk to my colleagues at other OEs. That's why I have partners like Tweddle. That's why I'm you know, in groups like MAP, and staying connected with people, and talking to people in the industry and learning, right? Because we're always learning. There's always something new that's coming. And that's what is my mindset every day, is how do I protect from that mistake, that simple mistake, you know, that could have been avoided. And so that's how I approach things.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. Keeping your ear to the ground on things is really important. And the first thing that comes to mind is like emergency response guides for electric vehicles.
Right.
When those first came out, they weren't super prescriptively regulated in terms of, okay, this is how the content needs to be laid out. But Gary, you'll remember, it's been a minute now, but it's very standardized now, down to like
Right.
colors on the table of contents, the exact content that you need. You remember that happening, right?
Exactly. And the electric, vehicle industry has matured quite a bit. 10, 15 years ago, that was just this little offshoot. And obviously now it's at the forefront of everybody's mind because it's where the world is going. So yeah, those things evolve. And that's part of our job on the supplier side, is to stay on top of that and stay invested. And like Tony was mentioning, that includes, researching, going to trade shows, webinars, things like that, where we're keeping a pulse on that development.
Mhm.
And I don't want to go too far off track on that answer for you, Nick, but I think that's where from our point of view, the fact that we can work with so many different OEMs in different fields, and they're not even all necessarily automotive, it gives us a really wide view of just all the different things that everybody's doing, which allows us to then help each individual customer with saying, this is a regulation that other companies are doing. Should we apply this for you as well? And if so, how?
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Right.
And you also talked a bit about the value of things. So if we use like emergency response guides as the example, that's probably, in my humble opinion, probably the best example of, okay, yeah, there's actually value to these regulations and rules. Can you talk just a little bit about, what we're trying to prevent with that regulated content?
In the case of the EV or first responders guides, especially,
Yep.
that is naturally going to be extra important because you're dealing with high voltage. And in the case of that publication, you're dealing with people who are coming to a scene of maybe an accident or something like that,
Right.
where they don't know.
It's a
They have
chaotic
no,
situation. They need to know
right.
what they're looking at. It needs to be
Yeah.
standardized, and absolutely right. Yep.
Yep, and delivered to them in a way, like you said, because they're in a hectic, seconds matter kind of situation, they don't want to go thumbing through looking for something or read paragraphs of text. So that affects how we develop the content as well. You want it, as to the point as possible, while at the same time covering all the important warnings and do not do type stuff. So it's a little bit of a tightrope walk because you want to throw all this information at them, but make it in a way that they can just jump in, scan.
It's got to
and
be
go.
easily digestible so
Yep.
that they know exactly what they're seeing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. People often refer to, technical publications as a boring industry. I obviously don't agree because I've spent over a decade in it. But if you talk about that scenario, that situation, you're a first responder, you're a firefighter, you're on scene, there's somebody trapped in a vehicle, and you've got to get the jaws of life out to get that person out of that vehicle safely and as quickly as possible. What's more important than, okay, where do I disconnect the high voltage and where can I put the jaws of life safely to not make this situation even worse to get this person out of this vehicle?
Right.
So, and we've had training for first responders forever for internal combustion engine vehicles and things like that. This is just a new thing because we have a new propulsion method. We're going to see the same thing, I bet you, when hydrogen vehicles start to hit the road, because there's going to be there's going to be a totally different set of emergency response guide content, right?
That's right.
We've got high pressure fuel disconnects that we need to worry about. We've got the combustibility of the hydrogen.
Right.
There's going to be all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
So definitely value to the information. So going off of that, so Gary, what does it look like in terms of taking it from concept to execution? I have to assume that there's a lot of really rigid workflows and process steps to make sure that we're capturing the right type of content and homologating it properly for various markets. Can you just shed some light on that one a little bit?
Sure. We've already kind of hit on the importance of things, obviously, why we need to do this. As far as the how goes, yes, it's a very structured process. It's a process that's been developed over decades of constant continual improvement, half the time based on things that have gone wrong in the past. Maybe 10 years ago, some publication went out, required a sticker because something was missed. That improvement for that problem became part of our process going forward. So it's a constantly evolving, constantly improving process. And from my point of view, in my role, that starts with when you start the project, when you set that up in a content management system, making sure all of the, without getting too, technical about the back end of things, that all of the data you're setting up for the publication is correct for your market, your language, because that's another thing we, didn't mention before is there's a translation impact of all this too. So, you want that all buttoned up front to where the language, the market, the regulations you're working towards. And then on the end of the process, having manual checks in place, because a lot of this stuff is automated, which allows it to be, very consistent. And then when you make a change, you're making it everywhere. But there's a human element at the end to triple check everything that's going out before it does. And that kind of goes back to Tony's analogy about the ground ball. Like 999 times out of 1,000, you field it clean. That one time you don't can be a problem. And the way you do that is you have a fine-tooth comb and as part of your QC, your quality check at the end, to make sure that these things are done. And that's done, I think, most easily with checklists, right? That's, these are the things we're looking for, have these checked. That can also even involve having a fresh set of eyes on content, not having the person who develops the content review it. That way you're getting that second look, that second perspective. Because a lot of times with any kind of writing or project, you're too close to the material sometimes. You develop all this stuff and then you review it and you're seeing what you think you wanted to say. Having a separate person as part of the process check that gives you that kind of safety.
Right, and that's part of
checking.
Part of the what we call the collab process, the collaboration, right? Because you and I get real close to it and we're super into the detail, but sometimes you're too close. So that's when, we send it to, my engineers review by section, their own section, and review things, and they catch things that maybe we overlooked, we omitted, something about, that feature or something. So it's important to have that collaboration and checklist as part of that checklist, right?
Yep.
Yeah, engineering is a great point, Tony, because it's not just the content on its own. There are physical changes that have to happen on the vehicle
Right.
that impact the content that are homologation related. So think of rear fog lamp. In the People's Republic of China, if you've got a publication going there, you have to have a physical rear fog lamp installed on the vehicle in order for it to
That's
be
right.
accepted by the market, right?
That's right.
So that impacts all the content, not just the owner's content to be able to point out that it's there, but also the service content,
Right.
right? So, and then you've also got contacts in market that you coordinate with as well, Tony, to understand different requirements that they
Of
need,
course.
right?
Of course. Yeah. Well, we're going through some of that now, right? As Canoo's going into the Middle East, right? There's image standards, not even just physical vehicle state. There are physical vehicle changes, right? That we have to do to be compliant in that market, but even images of what you can show and what you cannot show, in pictures, right? And the cover can't, can have this, can't have that. So, it really pays to have, two heads are better than one, and 10 are better than two, so
Yeah,
let's
absolutely.
let's all talk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you're right. GCC or the Middle East, they have some specific requirements. Just to know one of them, an additional one, like there can't be any references to alcohol, right?
Right.
Normally we have some text in the beginning of the book that warns people against drinking alcohol and other things like that for FMVSS and VSS requirements. But if that book is going to GCC, if it's going to Saudi Arabia, you can't mention alcohol. And
Right.
these are the things when I remove myself from, this industry that I've worked in for over a decade, I just think to myself, how would you know that? If you don't know that already, if it's not, how would you know?
It wouldn't be an obvious one to me, but
Yeah, me either for sure. Because I mean, especially with newer brands like Canoo and other EV companies, they move fast. There's a decision that can be made that says, hey, we're going to build vehicles and we're going to ship them to this other region, this other country. Go, 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 go. So I could see how things like this could easily trip anybody up.
it's easy to overlook something like that, right? And then you're
For sure.
explaining it to people you don't want to explain things to
Right.
later on, right?
Right. Orange is not your color. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Speaking of orange, we got to talk about the legal counsel as well, right? Because they
Sure.
get highly involved in things like warnings and cautions. A lot of those are homologation and market driven. So Gary, what do you? I know a little bit of a leading question, but what do you do on the content management side to ensure that your warnings and cautions not only get approved, updated, but stay consistent across multiple publications at once?
Sure. The best way to describe that, I think, is, for the various markets we're writing for, the various vehicles we're writing for, they're not written in this isolation. They're not written, on a book by book basis. They're actually pulled in from a database that has a central location of the warnings so that every time those warnings are pulled into a book, they're pulled in consistently. Even down to the level of a comma, where like a warning may be worded or punctuated a very specific way by a legal requirement, that you can't just trust some author just to type that in, because there's a lot that can go wrong. Every little step you're introducing, the human element, you're introducing the potential for error.
Sure.
So keeping that in a database where that information is pulled rather than redeveloped over and over and over again helps prevent that. In addition to when you say there's a change to a legal requirement that changes a number, let's say just from 9 to 10 for whatever reason, you can update that 9 to a 10 in your database, and then everything that pulls it in the future is now pulling the new content.
Be updated. Yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes important too with even things as simple as reprints. If the first print of a book went out with the old warning, but it needs to pull it in for the second print, when you have a shared repository of information, that's how you can help ensure those reprints and those retranslations pull in that new content. Because that's how things can often get left behind too, is, things roll over year to year to year. And if they're not pulling content from somewhere, you run that risk of things just kind of becoming obsolete.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to prevent, obviously.
Yep.
I'm also curious how you handle units of measurement. And the reason I even bring this up is because, well, mostly because I'm a nerd and I like this stuff and I like conditional content. but I've seen a lot of companies try to go without a mature content management solution in the beginning. I've seen them be like, you know what, I can do this in flat files. I'm going to develop my information in, Adobe InDesign, InCopy, or, name your flavor of say, we'll just say lower brow solution when it comes to complex content management. So could you talk a bit about how you even manage your units of measurement between different countries and regions?
Yeah, and that's done in a similar way. A lot of times it's done with metadata. If the project is established as a US book, the content then just goes to gallons, PSI, miles, Fahrenheit, that type of thing. If it's going to Canada, it then switches, and then the CMS, the content management system itself, helps pull that new content. Then you get kilometers, KPA, or kilograms, whatever it may be. And that can be tricky in a case, a lot of times the United States and Canada are in a shared publication. That's very common. But in that case, you still need to include both. Then you need to include miles and kilometers. And then which order do you put them in? Do you put it in miles with kilometers as a secondary thought, vice versa? Do you split that up by market? These are all things that the content management system can handle for you if you use it the right way. And that's where I think experience and just years of process come in handy. Is learning the hard way over decades has, shown us the way to do these things and the way not to do these things.
Right.
Just as
More,
much.
which is more important sometimes, how not to do it.
Exactly.
Is good lesson. Yeah.
I agree 100%. And to that avail, a lot of these things that we've come up with as an industry, not us specifically, because it's not necessarily unique to us, but is because of pressure that, the industry has gotten to be more efficient, right? To work smarter, faster. So think of being able to share a single table or a single topic or procedure, right? And you just condition the content therein. You've got one content set, and it can go to multiple different regions and be compliant at the same time. So
on short notice too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as everybody knows, in every field, everything's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller as far as timing. We're trying to hit this just in time deliveries, and our development windows every single year just get that much smaller. So you may be thrown in a situation where you have 2 weeks, make sure this is good to go. And that's where the point you're bringing up, Nick, I think comes in handy. Is if it's a template that's ready to go, it can then populate that information correctly without, you having to reinvent the wheel and go research this stuff all over again.
Right. So we've talked practical items, the hows, workflows, we've given some examples and things like that. We've talked tools and systems. We've talked about how the content needs to be reviewed. So to help the folks in the audience out a little bit here, let's just do a hypothetical. Say I'm a new brand, right? Or it could be an existing brand launching into a new market. But let's just say we're a new brand. We're launching into the market for the first time ever, and we've got to homologate our content properly. Why wouldn't I just do it myself? Why wouldn't I just insource this type of work and just handle it myself? Well, I guess let's hear from Gary first. What would that look like? How do you uncover all those things that you need to account for? How big of an elephant is that?
It's the biggest elephant you can imagine. It's, that stuff that the biggest challenge with that, I think, is there's 2 things. One is just the sheer amount of stuff you have to research and pull together.
Yeah.
But 2, it's a classic example of you don't know what you don't know. And that's where, and we've circled that back on this over and over just in this webinar here. Years of experience with multiple different OEMs and multiple different industries, that's already been done. So you can leverage that much more efficiently than trying to relearn that all yourself. And like I was saying, you don't know what you don't know. You don't even know where to look necessarily to get these regulations. So partnering with somebody who does this on a day-to-day basis, and this is their bread and butter, gives you that extra advantage of, standing on the shoulders of somebody that's already started the research rather than starting at the bottom with a blank slate yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And Tony, from a practical standpoint with you running a department and being responsible for all this stuff, what are your thoughts?
I'm very familiar with this exercise. I did it. So I mean, so we had conversations internally, which way do we go? There were people arguing to own the content and hold it ourselves. You know, and it can go both ways. But I think, you know, the biggest thing for me was you don't know what you don't know sometimes, right? As overlooking that warning, you know, things like that. But then there's the business case and the personnel side of it. So if I have a team of authors and we do this heavy lift like we're doing right now, we're doing collision manuals and emergency response guides and owner's manuals and service manuals and all of these things. And then once we get it out the door, it's dead silence, right? You don't have anything for that staff to do now. So you have to try and find something else for them to do. You have to make busy work. You have to lay them off. You have to lose some good people, you know, and wait until the next cycle. And the next cycle might not be as big. And now I don't need 10 people. I only need 2 people. And you go through this cycle, as a manufacturer. As you go into your new product launch, you'll be busy. So you'll need 10 people. So to have a partner that has the staff, has the experience, has the databases, has the knowledge, has the legal requirements covered, that's what made sense to me. You know, to do it that way, it's just a lot easier to manage. I think we're better protected in that manner, and so that's the reason why we went out to quote for vendors. So.
Yeah, no, makes sense. I definitely understand where you're coming from when it comes to a resource standpoint, especially because that's what we've seen a lot with newer brands. You know, the development work comes in fits and starts, right? You know, we're not talking about, you know, multiple programs with multiple vehicles where there's a steady bit of development work. Like if you were to be working with a traditional OEM, right? We're talking usually a single vehicle to start, maybe 2. Right? A lot of shared components, which is great for us because when we develop the content, we can share a lot of those topics.
Sure.
Right? But then based on engineering data availability, vehicle availability, it's all different, right? Happens in fits and starts. So to be able to pull somebody in at the ready,
So that's, you know, I mean, traditional automakers, you know, new models come out and, you know, in August, so you make your push to get it done during the summer, and, you know, August and September, the development team, you know, the faucet shuts off is what happens. The faucet just shuts off, you know, so then you've got another set of headaches, you know, for your staff at that point as well. So it just made it cleaner and easier for us. I mean, you know, we're pretty small and nimble. And it just made sense to have a strong partner that can help us with those things.
Yeah. And you also mentioned, you know, being able to hold somebody accountable. I think if I were in your position, I would want that.
Sure.
I would want someone
it does add a level of safety net, right?
Yeah.
But that's not a top priority. You just want, you know, good, accurate content, and, you know, and assume that you're there, but it does, you know, it keeps you, you know, you have one level of safety, I guess, but yeah.
And in terms of safety for content, Gary, you made note to, I mean, the way that I interpreted it was really benchmarking, right? You alluded to the fact that if you're using, you know, a supplier or a partner who's an expert in this type of work, you get the benefit of seeing, or you get the benefit of them working with so many different brands that they're probably going to find stuff, you know, a lot quicker than you on your own. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I think it gives you that, like you said, benchmarking. It's kind of like just built in because the data is there for the supplier to use. And it also helps, I think, the supplier offer up some suggestions for things that may not even be, you know, like, well, this is a requirement in this field, but you may want to get ahead of the ball on this. This is what your competitor, they are doing that too. So this is something that you could do.
And that's another part of the collaboration across the industry. You know, you guys come to me and said, okay, we'll do this and this. Have you thought about this? Or what is your plan to do X? And maybe I hadn't thought of that. Maybe, you know, I need to go back and do some more homework on our side and get an answer to that. Or maybe we say, you know, that's not something that we're worried about. We're not going to add that in there, you know, so, it's all part of it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's very much a partnership. That's the best way to put it. It's shared ideas, shared responsibilities, shared goals.
At the end of the day,
Right,
you just
yeah.
want to get quality content to the customer, right?
Yep.
Regardless of who that customer is. It could be that emergency response person, could be someone trying to figure out how to set the cruise control on their car, could be, you know, a technician. It doesn't matter. You just want quality content at the end of the day. And if I have to borrow an idea from another industry, another OE, whatever, if there's a best practice out there, I want to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I mean, it's been a great conversation with you guys. I'll just start to wrap things up a little bit. As we do, if anybody has any questions or comments, or if they want us to talk about any even ancillary topics, feel free to hit us up in the chat. Chat's live. We are monitoring it. But just to kind of frame things out a touch, we've gone over the practical guidelines, you know, and we've talked about some different workflows related to homologating your content, making sure that's compliant. We've talked about some of the governing bodies. We've talked about the systems and tools that you need to be able to support that type of workflow and that type of development, as well as how important the experience is to get you off the ground running quicker. So I think that's it. We don't have any questions in the chat. I don't see anybody typing. So thank you, everybody, for your time. We appreciate it. You can contact us a whole myriad of ways. You can see each one of us individually on LinkedIn, of course. You can hit us up at tweddle.com or Tony at Canoo.com if you want to get your pre-order in line.
Right.
That's right. We'll
That's right.
we'll have a recording ready for everybody by the end of the week. And the only thing that we ask is if you found any value in this, please share it with one other person so they can get value out of it as well.
Yep.
But with that, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Have a great rest of your day.